Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's AMA session. My name is Ola, and I will be your host for today. In case you're wondering what AMA means, AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. Welcome to today's AMA session. My name is Ola, and I will... Sorry about that. We just had a few technical difficulties where I could hear myself. Quite strange. So, as I was saying, the AMA stands for Ask Me Anything, and it's a live Q&A session where we've invited some amazing people in the industry, and you'll get a chance to be able to listen to their journey and learn from their experiences and also ask them lots of questions. So before we start, let's just say we've got an amazing guest who will be joining us today. And the format of the show, the first segment will be a bit where I'll be asking questions. And then in the second bit, if you send in your questions over there to the right, I hope that's the right side, we'll read them out and answer them live. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our first guest, Chloe.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Yep. So my name is Chloe, and I work as a machine learning engineer at Apple. I work with the Siri research group on text to speech. This is the kind of domain that I work in.
Nice. Are you based in the UK?
I am, yes. I'm based in an office in the UK.
Nice. And how did you get to where you are today?
So I got my full-time position with this research group off the back of an internship. So my educational journey is one where I did my undergrad, then I did a master's, and then I did a PhD. And during my final year of my PhD, I applied for internships because I thought it was really necessary to get some like industry experience. So I was successful in the internship application, and I ended up working in Cupertino, California with Apple for 8 months. And as a conclusion of that work, when I got back to the UK, I was like approached and offered a full-time position to continue working with the team.
Wow, that's amazing. Before you mentioned that you applied for an internship at Apple. Before then, did you have any other experience or jobs working in tech?
No, not specifically working in industry and tech, but I think especially with speech technologies, I think there's some research areas where the overlap between academia and in industry is quite broad. And so even though I hadn't worked in like a tech company environment, I had networked and gone to conferences and met a lot of people from like a lot of different companies. And part of my research in university was to stay up to date and to keep kind of in the loop of what is happening in industry in terms of speech technologies. So also making sure that I understood kind of like what the Googles, Amazons, and Apples of the world were doing. So yeah.
Would you say that networking played a key part in being where you are today and also keeping up to date?
For me personally, yes, because I don't know anybody who works in tech. So I didn't have the exposure, I think, to, I know, like family or people in my community where they could give me guidance on, first of all, there is a place for me in a tech company, and also things like how do I find a role, what does it require, like even what the work environment is like. I didn't have any understanding of that beforehand. And because I didn't take any years out of university and I continued study, my only exposure was really education. And so networking during conferences while I was doing my PhD played a huge role in me understanding kind of a pathway, and even considering working in industry. That was not something that I knew was an option for me when I was in like my first year of my PhD.
Wow, that's amazing. So what kind of projects have you worked on?
So outside of my actual job role now, I've always been interested in different technologies. I was kind of interested in like robotics. My passion and what my degree and my master's was in was mathematics. So I really enjoyed like applied mathematics and these kind of things. So I think personal projects I've done, like a small few things. Like I try to look at open source projects on GitHub. I'm a huge fan of Hacktoberfest. And so I've kind of like contributed to just random open source projects during that month, because that, again, like a hackathon was not something that I knew about beforehand, but through networking, people told me about it and I started looking more. So I'm really into things to do with kind of like sensors and action modeling and these type of things, which in some sense links to speech technologies because it's like modeling a dynamical system. But I during Brum Hack, so there was a hackathon at Birmingham University. I worked with a team of guys, and we used like a hand motion sensor to simulate, like, originally our idea was quite ambitious and we thought like a relaxation suite. So do you know how it was like a thing where like the fidget spinners and these like fidget gadgets come into
I remember
like,
them quite well.
so this became a thing. So we were trying to use like a hand sensor to simulate like similar actions, but like digitally. We ended up doing like a game against the computer of like rock, paper, scissors using this hand motion sensor to identify the actual actions that the human was doing. And also we built a digital theremin, so you could like play music by like raising your hand and change the frequencies, moving it forward and backwards. So anything to do with kind of like action recognition and motion sensors and these type of things I really like. I'm really into like signal processing and this type of thing. But that's like sort of a personal preference, so I try to like get involved with projects around that area.
Nice. And how did you go about finding out about Brumfest? And what was the other one?
Hacktoberfest. I highly recommend people do it because you get a t-shirt at the end of it and everyone loves a t-shirt. But it's through networking. So I definitely feel like I entered the tech space and world from a disadvantaged point of view, because I didn't know there were things like hackathons and these kind of events where people get together and code. I wasn't used to working on projects with other people, so like peer-to-peer coding and such, like code reviews. I wasn't familiar with this process. This was all like a really big learning curve for me during my internship. And I think the main reason for that is because my studies prior to me getting involved in these more, I guess, they're not sociable, but like group activities, was very isolated study. And networking exposed me to this. And then I had to go off my own initiative and start like researching things online and figuring out how I can, I guess, enhance my skill set to make me a desirable candidate to work in tech. Because I definitely felt like it wasn't enough that I honestly, I felt like it wasn't enough that I'd done a PhD in the area that I wanted to work in, because I didn't have the experience to integrate into like a full formed team. And so it was like I put it to the top of my priority list to get involved in these kind of open source projects, like working on things on the side, self-learning and practicing programming. Like these were all things on my to-do list so that I could, as I mentioned, like enhance my CV, so that when it did come to the time where I applied and chased up the like employment offer, I was able to say like, here's my skills, I can do this, I can start off at this point, and like this is what I've self-learned. I think all of these things ended up being quite positive when kind of reviewing my CV.
That's amazing. What kind of skills would you say you learned, and what technologies did you play around with?
So I constantly learn. So it's interesting because if I ever speak to people and they want to work in tech, they quite often say to me, "Oh, what programming language do I need to be able to use? Or can you bullet point like the things that I can learn to make me I don't know, a good candidate. And it's really difficult to do that. What I think you have to master, and what I think I've kind of mastered, is learning how to learn, which I know might sound a little bit abstract, but university massively helped me with this. But even now, I need to be able to pick something up very quickly and implement it very quickly, and also not kind of get bogged down in the documentation, but then at the same time understand the documentation enough to be able to explain it to someone else. And so something that I've been trying to refine is like my study skills, how I retain information, how I practice whatever topic it is that I'm trying to learn, if that makes sense. So it's a bit difficult to define specific things that I've learned to kind of get me here.
Yeah.
But I mean, I also am aware that this answer is not the most helpful, I guess, to people listening, because they'll be like, oh, well, I have to learn how to learn. So to be a little bit more specific, I think that it's always a plus. It doesn't matter in kind of what domain of tech that you want to work in, or if you aspire to like work in a tech company, having like some level of programming skill is always going to be useful. And whether that is like language specific or like a more general thing, like you just understand the kind of syntax and like data processing, I don't think it matters entirely. I think if so, I generally work more on like back end work projects versus front end user facing stuff. But I find that what is it called now? Like it'll come to me. There's this website that I use to like practice coding, and I use it quite a lot. I find it to be really useful. But also like Coursera and Udacity, like open course programs, I'm always doing top-up courses on data structures and algorithms. Like I go through the same content over and over, but I always think it's useful to refresh myself on the different data structures and algorithms that I'll be using like in this research context. But I also think it's like a really good skill to be able to define what it is that you're trying to work on. Like if you know you want to work on web interfaces, to break down the skills that you would need for that and focus only on them. Like I think that it can be really beneficial when you speak to, I know, other tech companies or just other people in general, to have a really solid understanding in a few things rather than have a shallow understanding in like many things. So it is down to like personal preference and what you're working on in your life and things like that. For me, I always research like um data structures basically. Is like my thing. Always doing topic.
Because a lot of people seem to think that after first year of university, data structures and algorithms and complexity don't come up in the world of work. And from what you said, they definitely do, and they're definitely important to know.
Absolutely. And I think that generally in a tech company, there's going to be different groups that will do different things. So you will have people who work specifically on like packaging tools or programs for a specific like output or a specific device domain, whatever it'll be. So, I mean, people like you might well be a software developer who wants to improve on, like who wants to work in that area, in which case you have to have a solid understanding of it. A lot of the stuff I work on in my PhD and in the side projects that I mentioned to you also is more kind of research software. So I quite often like develop these software packages, which I know they don't have to be the most efficient and the most like perfect code, but I do need to understand what is happening in each kind of stage. And I think that this is massively to do with the fact that my background is in mathematics. I'm absolutely against using kind of like black box libraries to do things. I will quite often write my own libraries and classes for like, I don't know, matrix multiplication and things like this. I think that these type of tasks are really good practice. And it's good at testing that you really do know what's going on. For me, working in this kind of research field, I have to be able to answer questions at the click of a fingers, and you guarantee if I use someone else's library, someone will ask me a specific question about that and I'll have to be like, oh, I don't know. And I'm not satisfied with that answer.
Nice. So while you're at university, you mentioned that you're doing a PhD, but along each stage, what would you say were the biggest lessons that you learned that's helped you to become who you are today?
So I think you grow an awful lot when you go to university in general, in terms of like maturity and understanding what you do and don't want. So at each stage of my education, I've kind of learned different things. After my undergraduate degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I did a master's as a consequence of, I don't know what I want to do in my life. During my master's, I realized that is a bad thing to do. You should have like thought about this a little bit more. But if I'm honest, during my master's, I thought to myself, research is not like an area for me. I'm not good at it. I don't understand what I'm doing. And I think that was down to not having much confidence. And also, I mean, my reality was, it was down to not feeling like I belonged in the kind of research world. That's how I felt during my master's.
Was there any reason for that in particular, that you didn't feel quite involved or felt a sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think there was like a few comments that was like said to me from senior lecturers, excuse me, that knocked my confidence in like the very early stages, and it's taken me a long time to bounce back from those. And I think that is something that working in industry has definitely taught me, that you have to be thick-skinned. I mean, for me, this is pretty much like my dream job. This is the like working with this research team when I was at university was like my top 3. And I didn't think that I would ever actually find my top 3. So I compiled a list of like top 3 places I would love to work, and then top 10. And I started applying from number 10 upwards, thinking, oh, I'm never going to get the number 1 job. So actually entering here, I thought it was all going to be like roses and sparks and fireworks and really enjoyable. And then I realized that actually this is where the battle begins almost. I think you have to be very thick-skinned and very consistent, and you have to be able to take some of the rubbish and hurdles that you will come across, and that's throughout university and in industry. Like, I don't think it gets easier until you're so senior in a company, like you've worked there so long, or your experience like dominates that level of respect straight away. What I haven't figured out is if I feel this way as a consequence of being like a Black female in tech, or whether it's just a case of I'm in my early stages within tech. Sometimes I think that it's a consequence of me being new at the company. Other times I definitely think it's down to it being a male dominated area, and just generally how I communicate with people, it can be quite different to others. And so I have to kind of be able to take crap.
Yeah. It's a pity that it has to be like that.
Oh, for sure. It doesn't surprise me though. I always so I learned about imposter syndrome a few years back, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is so real. I am like the definition of someone with imposter syndrome. And knowing about it and understanding it a little bit more, I constantly try to remind myself every single day in every single task when I'm there thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to check myself and be like, no, you do know what you're doing. You do deserve to be here. You got the job. You've made it this far. It cannot be a fluke, because if it was, someone would have sussed you out by now. These are like the most intelligent people in tech, right? So I definitely have to check myself. But what I find to be interesting is anytime I interact with any other female in this space, they also say the same thing to me. Anytime I speak to and connect with any other Black person in this space, they say the same thing to me. So it is a shame, I think, overall, but it doesn't surprise me anymore. And um, I just think it's something that people who are in tech and those who are considering working in tech, they have to keep in mind, and they have to be persistent and just like push through. I think like resilience is how we will overcome this. But the problem with that is that it's like a long-term goal. It's not going to happen overnight. But yeah, that's kind of my opinion on that.
Do you think there's anything we can do as minorities in the industry to make it a better space for all of us and more inclusive?
Absolutely. I think that we have to, it's very difficult when I think you find yourself in a position where you feel lucky to have the job, or I'm lucky to have been accepted on this internship, to also remind yourself that you do have a voice and you're able to use your voice in that situation. It's very, very easy to conform and like notice when things are not quite right and let them slide, as a consequence of worrying about your position, or your opportunity or your reputation. I think that there, I think there are ways how you can alienate yourself and become like the complainer in an office setting or in an environment. But I think there's also very strategic ways how you can use your voice and try and highlight some of the, I guess, problems or like things that you see as wrong or uncomfortable. And I think it's really important that people do that. It requires a lot of courage though. And so I don't knock people, or I don't feel disappointed if people are not able to do that. I myself have been in situations during university where I wish I'd spoke up and like said, you know, I actually need more help here, or the resources are limiting me. But I felt so like kind of privileged to even be in this situation and in this environment that I didn't think that it was my place to say that. I now realize that it was my place to say it, and it could have helped me out. Like I don't have to kind of run this long marathon with a bag of stones on my back. I can say to someone like, take the stones out of my bag, to help me be better, learn quicker, be more helpful. I think that's really important. There's another point which I know, Ola, I kind of spoke with you before about, but I think this is a really important point, that generally the conversation about inclusion and diversity in tech is happening now, and it has been identified that tech companies, they do need to get more BAME employees, students, people into the industry, and they need to reach out to areas outside of where like they would typically recruit or look for interns, in order to diversify teams. I think there's an awful lot that can be done once you're inside the company to speak out for and like align yourself as an ally to those who will not have the same privileges as you in that environment. So as an example, if you're in a situation where you notice that perhaps, I don't know, the female in the room never gets, like, always gets spoken over and is raising valid, useful points, but the points are not coming through. I think it's a really powerful thing for, if you're a man in the room, to say, to repeat the point, but give credit to the person who it originally belonged to. Like, it actually does so much for the other employee. This have happened to me in my job now, and the person who does it, he does it consistently. Wow. And I'm so grateful for it. It's never like a showboating situation. I might say, but in a quiet voice, like, oh, maybe we should do XYZ, and it doesn't get taken in at that one moment. And then at the end, this person, he will say, like, oh, Chloe also mentioned to do XYZ, and I think this is a good idea, like aligning himself as like an ally for me. And it's actually helped me grow and develop in the company as a person. Like, I think there's a lot that we can do to reach out, like first of all, to see when other people don't have the same platform as you in whatever environment you're in, and to align yourself as an ally with them and help them be heard and help them grow, and also like gain respect within whatever kind of environment you're in.
Would you say that your experiences has helped you to kind of stand out and almost be that shining light as a female engineer in a male-dominated environment?
No, I wish it had. No, honestly, I don't think so. I have had situations where people, like when I was at university, I did a lot of PGTA work, which is like teaching assistant, postgraduate teaching assistant work. And I've had students who have come to me and said, like, oh, I'm really interested in doing postgrad, and like asked me for advice on the basis of me being a Black woman in further education. So it was like they hadn't seen examples of that before, and then having me as a teaching assistant inspired them and made them consider it. And I think that that is like absolutely unbelievable, especially like I'm generally at the front of the class, really, really loving math and loving teaching it, but not seeing that like I have this opportunity to kind of give back to other people. In terms of the kind of tech space and my full-time job now, I definitely think that the company I work for, I've got the impression from what I've seen that they authentically are trying to diversify. And so I have tried to speak up and mention it, but and highlight the kind of lack of females, the lack of people who look like me in like my interactions. And it always comes across, I think, positive. I always get positive kind of energy from the people I have these conversations with. But in my day-to-day work, I honestly don't think it makes that much of a difference. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And so my personal opinion on kind of diversity and inclusion is that it's not actually about the kind of tick box metric, like, oh, we have a female, we have a Black person, we have a Hispanic person. I don't think it's about diversifying in that sense. I think it's about educational diversity. I think when you have people who come from similar backgrounds, regardless of like their race, religion, ethnicity, it doesn't matter, you will have the same kind of thought process, where I think educational diversity introduces different thought processes and like outlooks on a problem. And I think that's where teams can really be innovative and improve. And the problem with educational diversity is you have to learn to adapt and understand different thought processes, which is a challenge to, no matter how intelligent you are and no matter what experience you have, trying to understand someone else's thought process can be really difficult. So yeah, I think I ranted a bit, sorry.
It made sense. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to make the transition from studying or perhaps being in education to securing their first job in tech?
Yeah, I think that you should apply for the internship, apply for the job, like actually try and do it, because it is achievable, and it's probably not as difficult as you think it's going to be. Tech and the kind of pace that technologies and AI and machine learning, the pace in which it's growing and expanding, and the applications for these things is way ahead of the amount of people in the UK, in the world, who are able to fill these jobs. And so even if you feel like not qualified enough, or you don't feel as though your skill set is quite the right fit now, it doesn't mean that in like 2 years with working in an industry that you won't be hitting these kind of benchmarks of like expected skill sets. My experience working in tech is that it's a very fast-paced environment. I learn every single day. I've done things that if you asked me 2 years ago, would I know how to do? I would be like, don't let, like, this is not a joke. No, of course not. But it's like, you have this environment where you're around like a lot of incredibly intelligent people, and you can just like soak up this information. I think that if people want to work in tech, they should just apply, and they should like really run with the confidence and skills that they already have, like promote those rather than. I hear a lot of people always ask me, how do I prepare for technical interviews? How do I prepare for coding interviews? And like people will work for 4 or 5 weeks flat out trying to like learn all of these new, I know, data structures and algorithms, or like the different kind of questions that they will ask you to try and like pass that. I think that it's really desirable from a recruitment point of view if someone just says that I don't know how to do this, but they're able to like think critically about a problem and break it down, even if they're not able to produce like the final code that's needed, for example. Yeah, I think that using the skills that you already have to kind of lead rather than trying to learn last minute the skills that you think a company wants is always the better way from my experience, because you can deliver the information so much more confidently, and that is like a game changer, again, from like a recruitment point of view.
Interesting. How would you say one could balance what they're learning and know when they need to dive further into something?
That's a really difficult question, and I was thinking about this beforehand because, as I mentioned, I constantly have to learn new things. I have to learn how to use new tools. I recently was looking at kind of user facing interfaces and started looking at like Flask apps, and this type of stuff. When do I know when to stop? I don't know when to stop. I have this constant reminder that the more I learn, the more I learn, the less I know about anything, because I just realize that like there's so much more to learn, and so what I know is just such a small subset. It always feels like shallow knowledge. I do try to dive deeper in things that I know are like directly relevant to what I'm working on at the time. But I've kind of come to terms with understanding that it's okay to have like a shallow understanding of things, because when you interact and network, whether this is on like open source projects, just generally with people, like I use Twitter so much, and I've got like a really great like list of followers now that I follow who constantly talk about tech and like different topics on Reddit and things like this. I I go to people who are experts in that thing to understand more about something. I don't have to be the person to carry all of that information because it's just impossible. That being said, I don't think it's enough to just know the terminology of a specific topic. You could probably pass having a conversation with like a really basic conversation with someone, but if they kind of question you any further than that, the show is up. We will see right through you. We will know that you know nothing about it other than the terminology. So but I think that's the kind of thing that comes with experience, and it links back to this idea of my kind of what I try to optimize now is my study skills, and I try to learn how to learn efficiently. And so with that, it's just like a feeling, I think, that I've built up over time from working on different projects and working like in academia, and like some of the side projects that I worked on before being in this company, that I just have like a notion of when I need to stop now. But yeah, I mean, I always like podcasts and YouTube as well. I'm like one of these sad people that will listen to YouTube videos about, I don't know, different technology or different kind of tech-based things, to just, I guess, keep up to date with what is happening like in current tech affairs, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any particular YouTube channels or podcasts that you listen to that we can share with our viewers?
Do you know what? I do. I have a list of them actually. I didn't prepare a list of them, but I probably should have. Let me see if I can get some of them up. There's this one podcast, Tech-ish, which I absolutely love. This is like a breath of fresh air because it talks about I guess like current things happening in tech. But when they speak about tech, it is overall, like tech as an overall category. So that does not mean programming, it doesn't mean the engineering departments, it can be anything. It can be like funding if you want to start a startup and these kind of things. And it also merges it with just kind of like current popular topics that are trending for that week. And yeah, I always find that to be a super useful listen to. It's like a really easy listen. I always try to catch up with This Week in Machine Learning. I listen to that through podcasts. What else do I have here? I really like BBC4, More or Less Behind the Statistics.
What happens in More or Less Behind the Statistics?
So they basically, again, like look at kind of current stories or things in the news. Like they recently did like a segment on Brexit, and they tried to like explain with statistics the consequence of it went funny then for a moment, but yeah, back to More or Less Behind the Statistics. It broke down what the consequence would be in terms of like the economy and like the finance, like the global finance of the UK. And it just it dives more into, I think, like the numbers behind news stories, where generally media stories kind of avoid this aspect of it. But I also listened to a really good episode, but it was a long, long time ago, about the number of stars in the sky and like how you can approximate this and stuff like that. So,
wow. So what we'll do is we'll share all of these resources on our socials, and I'm sure you'll probably enjoy them. What we're going to do now is take some questions from the audience.
sorry, can I just say one thing? Because I just remembered the website that I use to practice like different coding, and it's HackerRank. This is my favorite website to use. It's like you don't need to worry about like your like computer compilers or text editors or nothing, because you can just do everything online. You can compile everything online, and they have like, for me, like a lot of really good challenges in different domains around like learning to program and things like this. So HackerRank is the website that I always point people to.
Thank you for
I should get
sharing.
sponsored by all of these.
Of course. So I'm just putting up some of the questions that people have sent. So Warner asked, what exactly is machine learning, and how is this along with artificial intelligence used today?
So I like to describe machine learning as math, but there is actually like the naming conventions around machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning, these kind of things. It is kind of a controversial thing, I think, in the research community, because people use them, like they overlap the use of them and use them interchangeably. So I think of machine learning as I guess finding an output to a problem that is data driven only. So I find and I think that deep learning and machine learning, like they kind of not merge, but there's like a really big overlap between them, because like the techniques that you can use in machine learning are also the techniques that you can use in deep learning. But I think of machine learning as like data driven modeling, as opposed to like theoretical modeling, so like things that we know based off like mathematics, like pure mathematics and modeling. These are like the algorithms that you then apply like huge amounts of data to learn more from the data.
Nice.
And then sorry, I think the other part of that question was how are machine learning and AI kind of linked. Again, I think it's down to the definition of how you think of machine learning and how you think of AI. Again, I personally kind of think of them as the same thing. I do think like machine learning is AI. How I would say they were linked is, so okay, we're kind of in this like information age, right? Where because everyone understands the power and importance of gathering data about populations, about, I don't know, picture content, about the environment, there's like things that we can extract from the data that we don't necessarily extract when we observe the specific phenomena, right? And I think that when you use like machine learning to output some of these like niche things that we wouldn't be able to observe as humans, we can then use like more complex models and like deep learning to get systems to like automatically do that. So I sometimes think of like AI to be like the automation of machine learning, which is kind of like semi-supervised by humans, because we quite often like process the data and like turn the knobs of the machine learning box to get our output, where I think of like AI being able to automate all of that. So the kind of computer or system just finds the output and determines how it finds the output, as opposed to human intervention.
Nice. And I'm guessing that involves also kind of training your model using data, right?
Yeah.
Nice. We've got another question from Andre, and he wants to know how people can get more involved in machine learning development, and also how can we make it more inclusive? Because I know we've seen things like the soap dispenser not dispensing soap when it recognizes a black hand, but the moment it sees a much lighter hand, it dispenses soap, or the self-driving cars not recognizing people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And also we've got things like Google recognizing black people as gorillas.
Yeah. I do I know I it would be, it's difficult to answer that question with a solution. I think if
Yeah.
anyone was able to, pretty much every company would have worked by that solution by now, because I do think like when I've spent time in kind of Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, and spoken to other people in tech companies too, I know this is a thing that companies are, at least they're advertising that they're aware of it and conscious of it. Like whether they are authentically trying to achieve diversity, I don't know. I can't speak for like tech companies. I do think that it's a case of, first of all, like encouraging people to apply for the roles. I myself, like completely outside of work and university, I've worked in like my local community at trying to encourage and to set up workshops and kind of coding days for people of color. And quite often the attendance is low. I don't believe this is because of lack of motivation or anything. I think it's down to a confidence thing. I think generally people worry when they don't consistently see examples of other people who look like them in these spaces. They start worrying and thinking, like that's not a space that I can occupy. But I think it is, and I would just like always encourage people to if it's something that you think you want to do and that you're interested in, apply for it. Like, just really be courageous on that. I've said courage like quite a few times. I think is so important, because it's really easy to talk yourself out of, oh, well, let me just do this one course. Let me brush up on my Python skills before I apply in case I get a technical interview. Let me read this paper or work on my GitHub before I apply to this internship. And it's easy to like postpone like taking the dive and actually trying to occupy these spaces. I myself have done this. I do it now, and I kind of kick myself when I've missed the opportunity or missed the deadline because I've postponed it. But I think that within within like the BAME community and within the Black community, just encouraging young people and like friends and people who you're in university with, like say to them like, oh, have you ever thought about doing a PhD? Have you ever thought about applying to an internship? I recently took over the minorities in STEM handle on Twitter, and I did a poll of um who has ever considered, who would want to do an internship in Silicon Valley, and whether you have applied, considered it, not interested, or like don't think that you're good enough for it. And there was like, it was overwhelmingly people who would be interested but haven't applied.
Wow.
And I reached out to every single person who voted on that and was like, apply, go and apply. Look on LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn is fantastic for this. They have like, in the job search, you can actually search like internship opportunities as well. The big tech companies advertise their internships there. And like, if you have the app on your phone, therefore the tech company is big enough that like it's a standard app on your phone, they have an internship program, and this rolls multiple times every single year. Apply every term. Like, this is what I would encourage people to do. You have to be proactive and you have to be loud about it. Like, don't apply, and if you don't hear nothing back, feel disheartened. Apply every single year. It's interesting because that's actually like, I applied every year for an internship. And it was only in my final year of PhD that I actually got kind of responses. And I interviewed with like Amazon, Toshiba, and Apple. And I chose Apple because they were like my favorite company, and I was like, yes, that's definitely what I want to do. But it took me like a number of setbacks before I even got that opportunity. There was the amount of applications that I sent out and never heard anything back. Like, I think I applied for a company called Magic Leap. I don't even know if they're still around, but at the time when I was applying, like, they were the coolest like tech company to me. You should check out some of their demos as well, because there's like mind blowing. There's like this virtual reality and really interesting modeling stuff. I've applied for them like 7 or 8 times. I have never got a response from them, but I would probably apply again. I don't like let the no response stop me from being there.
Perseverance is key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take a few more questions before we round up. So we've got another question from Albert, and he wants to know whether Apple recognize BAME events or celebrations like Black History Month, and are there any talks and events held to make people more aware and feel more included?
Yes, it's a huge thing actually.
That's good. And
so I say that from the point of view that like I have attended these, so I can't speak on behalf of Apple and say what their intentions are, but I have attended like internal events centered around like being Black in the company. I've also attended events being Black and British in the company. I think that they from what I've seen and my experience here, which is why I'm also like such a huge fan of this company, is that they do actually mean it when they try to diversify.
Which is amazing. We'll take one last question before we round up. And this is another question from Andre. What's it like working at Apple?
Oh, it's pretty cool. It is pretty cool. It is challenging. But, you know, I really wouldn't have it any other way, because I think that if you want to work in tech, it kind of goes back to the point I made about you need to have thick skin. And I think every tech company has their own culture, and I like it's very much a thing where in the position I'm in now, like you should feel free to speak to anyone regardless of like the hierarchy, or like there's not kind of like an upward hierarchy. Everyone's opinions matter and everyone's points are valid. So it also means that with that kind of culture there's an opportunity to get criticized a lot because there's a lot of people kind of really paying attention to everything that you say. But having thick skin, but also being able to understand that this is just like more information and advice and like a learning opportunity. Like I constantly remind myself that so I don't ever feel down by it. But it's challenging. Like working in tech is challenging. It's incredibly fast paced. And like everyone has a smartphone in their pocket. And so working for like one of the like top tech companies, you get criticisms from family, from friends, from strangers all the time. Like people say like, oh, this feature's rubbish, why do you use this? And like obviously you can't take these things personally, but then there's often times where like something you specifically have worked on, people are like, oh yeah, that's rubbish, I hate that. And you're like, damn, I worked really hard on that. But I mean, it comes with the territory. Like I think that in this kind of day and age and this kind of work culture that we're in, like as like a millennial generation wanting somewhere to work, I 100% think that tech is the most interesting place to work. Like the fact that you get to engage with a research community, work on like product facing customer using devices and like features, and you like just the kind of environment and skills that you pick up and learn along the way, I think is like incredible.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I wouldn't choose any other industry, to be honest.
No,
Tech is
I
where.
tell everyone, I'm like, even if you don't know anything about programming or computers, get into tech. There's like there's, and that's another like really key point. You don't actually have to be able to be like, you don't need to be computer literate to be in tech necessarily, because there's like so many domains. There's like the design aspect, there's like even the project managing, like human resources, finance. Like you don't have to be like a nerd programmer like what you always see on like TV or on memes to actually make it in tech. I've come across a number of people actually who now work in tech as consultants on diversity and inclusion. So they come in and like train people on how to identify if a member of your team feels alienated. How can you really like give everyone equal opportunity in a meeting space or in like a team? Like what are the kind of team leading things that you can do? Like there are so many opportunities to work and engage with the tech community, and I just wish that more people would. I mean, if you spend any time in like Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, there is like this electricity between people where like if you're an Uber driver, if you're a like fast food seller, if you're a CEO of a startup company, like everyone has this excitement and enthusiasm, and it's because they're constantly surrounded by like new technologies and like this digital space, and they understand, because like it's such a hub for this type of thing, how to like best utilize this. If I could bring that same energy to like the UK, I think that I know so many people who could like benefit just from like having exposure to that space, and how you can like develop individually when like interacting with that environment. Like so what, like I always, it's kind of like, if you ever feel like, oh, I'm not skilled enough, or I don't understand it enough, or I don't have like the knowledge to even go to this event, or like some people might even be in a situation where they wouldn't sign into this AMA because they didn't think they would understand, like just get rid of that kind of fear. There is so much opportunity and space for people to work in tech. Just you should do it for your mental health. It's like such a great place to be.
Definitely. Thank you. I think the biggest thing that I took from that is we shouldn't let the imposter syndrome get to us.
No, definitely not.
Ah, But that concludes the end of our AMA session. I'd like to say thank you, Chloe, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before you go, where can people reach out to you and find you?
Oh, so on social media, so like on LinkedIn, I generally use LinkedIn for kind of like professional purposes, but Twitter is like my all-time favorite social media, and I'm on Twitter at call me Cloche, I think. So it's like Chloe SH because someone took Chloe. And also on Instagram, it's the same it's at call me Cloche. So
Cool, thank you. What we'll do is we'll share that on our socials as well.
okay, cool.
Thank you to everyone that's tuned in, and we'll see you next time.